The Cowboys coaches spoke to the media on Tuesday. We'll tell you about our biggest takeaways from that media availability next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're talking about the coaches speaking to the media during their availability on Tuesday. And I want to start with the Cowboys' new offensive coordinator, Clayton Adams, who I thought had a lot of really interesting things to say. Landon, what were some of your big takeaways from his little discussion?
Man, there was so much, right? I think we start with kind of the question is like exactly what the role is going to be like, right? This is a very unique situation with the way that the hierarchy is set up, right? You have a play calling head coach, right? An offensive coordinator who's not calling plays, which, obviously that's a familiar situation with the Cowboys. We had that situation last year. I think the difference being that this offensive coordinator is very much specifically a former position coach who has a lot of time invested as an offensive line coach. So the question now becomes how much and how involved is he going to be in, the offensive line room? And I think that question was kind of even further put into the spotlight when they hired Ken Dorsey, right, as a passing game coordinator. Yeah. It really feels like it gives the opportunity for Clayton Adams to kind of, obviously be the offensive coordinator and have that as a full time, but also to be able to spend even more time if he needs to in that offensive line room. So he talked a little bit about that. And I think, the one, kind of bottom line that he had there about that part was I definitely won't be staying away from the offensive line room.
Yeah.
He made it clear that he has a job to develop a relationship with guys like Dak and CeeDee Lamb. But I think I have the quote here. It starts in the offensive line room, which I think is, telling for the offensive coordinator. Not surprising because he's an offensive line coach, but I love that tenor of the offense and that it seems like the real kind of takeaway in what he wants to do with this offense is, and he said it, right? When asked what he wants in the offensive line room, he says, same thing I want from every player on offense, and that is to create violence in the game. And I love that quote. I mean, I made a meme of it. That's what we need. We need them to create violence along the offensive line.
So a couple things. Ken Dorsey was actually speaking as we're talking right now, and he was talking about his job is to tie the passing game to the run game, which I find really interesting, but we can talk about that later. I wanted to ask you about, with Clayton Adams as the offensive coordinator, do you think they're going to look for a different type of offensive lineman where maybe in the past they've drafted more athletes, right? Rather than guys that are just these big, powerful, mean offensive linemen that maybe can't move as well. Do you think we're going to see them start to go in the other direction?
I think that they're definitely going to, reprioritize toughness and strength and physicality in the offensive line room. I mean, I think that that's been a trait that they've always kind of looked for, but I do think you're right that there has been a trend towards, more athletic traits at certain points.
Longer, right? Long arm guys. Yep.
I feel like Tyler Smith kind of straddles that line, right? A little.
He's
bit,
he's a perfect example of both on how you combine both of them. But I guess I look at somebody like Cooper Beebe, who I like a lot, right? He was the athlete that played a lot of different positions at Kansas State. Is he someone that has the tenacity to be what Clayton Adams wants from one of his interior three offensive linemen? I don't know.
I think he does, but I think your question is valid, right? Is do we need to kind of reevaluate this offensive line room with a new set of eyes, like looking at it through these kind of what we've been laid down, right? Like the idea that they're going to want to be more physical. They're going to want to be more violent. They're going to want guys with better grip strength and guys that are physical finishers. I mean, one of the things that he talked about when he was discussing the new offensive line coach that we hired from K-State was that he loved watching his team play and just, obviously they had talented players, but watching them execute correctly and then he mentioned finishing, right? Finishing guys onto the ground. So I think guys like Brock Hoffman are going to get like extra long looks, I would assume, from Clayton Adams in this group, Riley as well. I think that it's not that I think they're going to move away from athletes, completely, but I think that they will potentially look at they won't disqualify tough guys because they may not quite be the best athlete on the field. I think that they will accept, maybe fudge some of the athletic parameters, as long as you have that X factor of being a mean, nasty guy who finishes dudes to the ground.
Well, this is where I'm interested to see in like how the front office and the scouting department, do they change some of their philosophies when it comes to like drafting guys? Again, not necessarily like in the first 2 rounds, because most of the guys that you draft in the first 2 rounds are really good athletes anyways.
Yeah.
So I'm not concerned about that. Like, but do we see them take less guys like Matt Waletzko, who is this really tall, athletic tackle that just didn't have enough maybe physicality? Or do we see them lean more to like the Nathan Thomas, who they drafted in round 6, round 7 last year, who maybe doesn't have the athleticism, but is just a mean son of a gun?
I was thinking of Ozzy Trapilo, right? I don't know. This may be a real deep cut for some people that haven't gotten too far into the draft yet, but there's a guy from Boston College, right?
Yeah.
His dad was an offensive lineman who also went to Boston College. I mean, he really reminds me of one of these just old school 90s offensive tackle type. And I think that those guys are back on the table a lot more, right? The kind of I don't want to call him try hard, because all these guys are incredible athletes now.
Yeah.
But maybe a guy who isn't going to look so great in the underwear Olympics necessarily, but who gets the job done.
Well, let me give you an example. Like one of his offensive linemen, Will Hernandez, was somebody that we studied a lot when the Cowboys was at the 2018 draft, maybe. But it wasn't a superior athlete, but was just strong and was so stinking tough. I wonder if even someone like Hernandez in free agency could be the type of player that they're looking to bring in to kind of build some of the depth on this offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly is, just like they're looking for guys who can move bodies. I think the one thing that, and this is even larger than the Clayton Adams conversation, is it sounds like the kind of key modifier that Schottenheimer keeps bringing up as something that he wants to change is he wants this team across the board at every position to be more physical, to be a more physical football team. So I think that starts up front. That starts with the offensive line. And I agree with you. I think it's not so much going to change how things are done at the top, because at the top, you get your choice of guys that are both athletic, technically sound, and have the right attitude. It's more that, 5th or 6th round guy, when you're choosing between a raw, undeveloped athlete who has, incredible potential, or a guy who maybe is just athletic enough to play in the NFL, but will bury dudes into the ground every single play, maybe get an extra penalty for playing past the whistle too long. Those kind of tones.
Well, let me put a name to it. Like, I wonder, Josh Simmons, who we talked about on Monday, who is a athletic left tackle type. I'm not saying the Cowboys would take him off their board, but I wonder, like, if that's a guy that the Cowboys probably wouldn't consider, because I don't know if he's the type of offensive lineman that's going to move defenders off the ball. I think he would fit better in a wide zone attack where you need your offensive lineman to be out on the move. I'm wondering if they're maybe going away from those type a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're looking for kind of comparison, I think we're looking more like the LSU kid versus the kind of more athlete guys, right? The guys that have experience, that have the makeup, right? Of the kind of the right kind of folks, the mentality, the toughness, the strength, the kind of grip strength, things that are a little bit more difficult to test with athletic testing or at the combine, but you see on tape, right? Maybe he's got, in that case, maybe his arms aren't long enough, or maybe he doesn't run the short shuttle as quickly as you like. But when you turn on the tape, this guy is, burying guys and sitting on guys and, setting the tone and causing the defense to get personal fouls because he's hitting them after the snap. I mean, that's what this offense needs to kind of transition into the type of offense it needs to become in order to be playing in December, January, and February.
Last thing, and there's a lot of good quotes from him, which I'm sure we'll get to over the next couple of weeks. But he said, if you're not part of the starting 5 offensive linemen, you need to be able to play as many positions as possible. That actually fits with like what Mike McCarthy wanted anyways, the position flex. And I think that's really going to benefit somebody like TJ Bass, who's played both guard spots, who has worked at center in the past, who played tackle in college. And I think even somebody like our North Carolina offensive tackle. Why can't I think of it? Yeah, Austin Richards. I think that benefits him as well.
Yeah, I agree. I hope that he is the kind of physical player that they're looking for as well. But I agree. One last thing they said that he brought up that I thought was important. They said if you look at us the last 2 years, he's talked about his time in Arizona. They were 70% under center for the
yes.
That is something I think that is worth mentioning. That is a huge thing that is going to be a positive for this team. Running the football with Dak under center is going to be huge for play action, for the run game, for everything. That was awesome to hear.
It's one of my biggest issues that I have with the Cowboys, especially in the first half of the year. The run game was awful, but a lot of it was just because of their own fault. They were just in shotgun all the time, and it's really hard for runners to get any kind of momentum when you're playing in shotgun. I want to see more downhill runs, and it sounds like we're going to get that from Clayton Adams.
Yep.
Let's talk about Matt Eberflus, who spoke to the media on Tuesday. We'll talk about his most interesting comments next. This episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Layden, let's talk about some of Matt Eberflus's comments, because I thought what he said was very interesting about the focus on the run, focus on turning the ball over. What were some of your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it. I mean, it was just interesting to hear him, answer the question of what is the focus of the defense, and he basically said it. Focus of the defense is stopping the run and turning the ball over. Those were line ones for him, right? And he started with stopping the run. It's interesting, right? Because you don't see a ton of these types of defenses, the kind of 4-3, again, we're generalizing this, but he has Tampa 2 roots. I mean, he comes from Marinelli and who comes from, Kiffin. So there is obviously some roots there in that kind of style of defense. And usually a lot of those guys, like the Quins, all the different kind of modern iterations of those, send 4, drop 7 type of defenses, they have much more of an emphasis on the pass, right? And like they play the run on the way to the pass, right? So it was interesting to hear Eberflus kind of reprioritize the run game here, which is, I think, appropriate based on kind of what you're seeing in the NFL nowadays. So I thought that was kind of the interesting thing that kind of stood out immediately. And then some of the other stuff that I thought that was really kind of fascinating was him talking about how he wanted to use Micah, right? Because that's obviously that's kind of really that's line one in a lot of this, right? It's just kind of figuring out how you're going to use your generational defensive player to your advantage. And that was a big concern, I think, for a lot of Cowboys fans hearing when he got hired, because, he's not necessarily known as the kind of Quinn. Well, I mean, Quinn wasn't necessarily known as an innovator at that point when he came into Dallas and changed things up, but there were concerns that, that you weren't going to be able to get that same level of creativity from Eberflus. So to hear him kind of come out and talk about the fact that yeah, he's a pass rusher. We're certainly going to be using him mostly as a pass rusher, but then also to discuss the idea of he's also a multi-talented athlete who can do a lot of different things, and we'd be foolish to kind of not use those other things as well. I think he understands what he's doing. I think he understands, what's going to make Micah happy for sure.
Well, that's what I was going to say. To me, I never really worried about it. It is reassuring to hear Eberflus talk about that because you want to use your all-pro edge rusher in a lot of different ways, but generally Micah kind of gets what Micah wants, and it usually works out for the Cowboys defense. So like, they're going to find creative ways to make sure he gets the matchups that he wants. I'm not worried about it, but this does make me feel better. Like it's not going to be an issue.
Look, we hear the platitudes every single time there's a new coach who comes in or a new coaching system of, hey, it's the Jimmys and Joes, not the X's and O's. It's about the players, right? We're about the players here. But having said that and understanding that it is a coaching platitude and it is something that all these coaches said, it was nice to hear again, because I think that was the other thing that we have concerns here is that the kind of general impression that we got, at least in comparison to what we got from Quinn, was that he was a little bit more set in his ways. He was a little bit more not like less willing to be creative, but just seemingly did less creative stuff with his flavor of 4-3. I wonder if part of that wasn't talent based on what he had at Chicago. And now that he's got a guy like Micah Parsons, who, they frankly did not have at Chicago, maybe it helps kind of open that up a little bit to kind of create situations that put them into advantageous positions.
Couple other things that I noticed. I have not started my in-depth coverage of the cornerbacks yet. Generally, I wait till after the combine because that's just a position where the athleticism matters so much.
Yeah, sure.
But he did have this quote, which I thought was interesting. It all starts with being able to play man coverage, I believe.
Yeah.
Being able to match guys up and stay with your man and then work on your zones from there, which leads me to believe like they're going to be looking at these corners in the draft that just have a lot of experience in man-to-man. And somebody like Will Johnson, who I have seen a little bit, who is primarily an off-zone coverage at Michigan, I'm wondering if he's maybe not the type of defensive back they're looking for.
That was interesting to me because that flies in the face a lot of what we've heard and what we've seen from Eberflus. And I'm wondering if that's more of a kind of transition that he's kind of going into now, right? Because they didn't play a ton of man coverage with Chicago from what I remember seeing. And we had Cody Alexander on and talked about that. And one of the first things he mentioned was just not as much man coverage, I think, at least compared to what you saw with Quinn, right? So he's definitely going to be more of a zone guy is what we've told. I'm wondering if that wasn't maybe a function of the guys that they had in the building, right? Like, maybe they felt like they've got Jalen Johnson, who is just an elite, a zone corner, and they kind of didn't want to move away from that. So, but yeah, it was interesting to hear him mention the man coverage thing because that is one of the things I was a little bit more concerned about was, man coverage is necessary, especially in today's NFL with the way that you're playing defenses against some of these modern offense. So I really wanted to hear him. I wasn't let me back up. I wasn't expecting to hear him say that because all the evidence that we have is that he isn't a big man coverage guy. So I am excited by that. And I'm glad that it seems like not only is he committed to playing some man coverage, he made it sound like it's the starting point, and then they kind of go from there.
So just put a pin in that. We'll come back to when we're talking about some of these corners over the next 2 months. Because it's just interesting, especially if they try to go out and get somebody else, maybe in free agency of the draft. One other quote that I wanted to talk about before we move on, he was talking about the defensive line depth. And he said, they asked him about Osa Odigizua specifically, and he said, certainly Osa is a guy that we like a lot. He's a really good player for us, but we'll look at other guys too. We're in the middle of the process right now. It's really about getting the depth on the defensive line that we need. There are some really good pieces there to work from. It's exciting to be able to look at this or look at that in the future in terms of the drafts and acquiring other players that are special talent guys. We're excited to get that done. Obviously, he's going to have to say nice things about Osa because Osa's currently on the team, even though he's a free agent here in about 2 weeks. I do wonder if Dallas is going to really prioritize defensive line depth rather than having 2 or 3 high end starters.
Do you want to tell the audience who you said that quote sounded like when you read it to me earlier?
It sounded like Stephen Jones in Matt Eberflus's body.
That's right. And I wonder if it isn't just Matt Eberflus, regurgitating what Stephen Jones told him to say about any kind of potential.
There's also some truth there. Look at the top
Sure.
teams in the league. They usually have 6 to 7 guys that they feel really good about playing on the defensive line.
Absolutely. What he said isn't a lie. I think it was more just deflecting about talking about somebody that they can't talk about, right? And a restricted free agent. So, I think, with this kind of defense, you have to play with waves. Like it's just not. It's not like that anymore. Where you can have like 4 guys that will play 89% of the snaps, and then you just like take them out for a series. Like
no, because they'll be gassed by the time you get to January.
That's right. And they'll be gassed by the time you get to the fourth quarter of the first game.
Well, that too, but like you can't have these guys logging 1,100 snaps before we get to the playoffs.
Absolutely. So you have to have a good rotation. I mean, if you think about with Quinn, when the Cowboys were really good, it wasn't just because Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence having a resurgence or anything like that. It was because they had 4 or 5 guys that they could rotate in. It's
Fowler, Armstrong, Gregory at a time. Sam Williams. I mean, they had a lot of depth.
So, and I think they can get there again, right? Like, I mean, if you like Nealon, if he takes a jump, we'll see how Sam Williams comes back. Maybe they draft a guy. Maybe you bring D-Law back, and suddenly you've got that kind of depth again at the defensive end position, and now it becomes about defensive tackle, right? Which was another interesting thing he brought up of talking about kind of, Mozzie and all that. But, yeah, I do think it's important to not only have like 2 or 3 dudes who can make the difference, but to have like another 3 or 4 guys back there who are going to come in and not just kill you because they're in there, or actually, be able to make a play here and there on their own.
Yeah. And even in some of those defenses that Eberflus had with the Cowboys, they kind of lacked the high end guys. They had DeMarcus Lawrence, but they had a lot of really good role players, and it's why they were able to survive on that side of the ball. So I would expect the Cowboys to probably bring in a couple veteran edge rushers, whether that's bringing back Carl Lawson or maybe signing Von Miller once he's released from Buffalo. Like, they're going to be in the market for a couple more edge rushers. I'm more interested in to see what they do on the defensive line, because that's really where they need depth. Landon, let's talk about the comp pick formula, because the Cowboys are expected to get several compensatory picks here in 2025. How does that work? We'll explain next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. There are several times where I want to watch a game, but maybe I missed the first 5-6 minutes. You can go on the FanDuel app, place your live bet, make some same game parlays. It is so much fun. Plus, the app is super easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets, and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Landon, we had a question from Blue Sky a couple of days ago. This one's from @MidnightButterfly. They wanted to know, I would love if you guys explain in some upcoming episode how compensatory picks work. Like, how do you get them? What is the most that you can get? How are they applied? Do you want to take this one?
No, I think you should take it, because I think, listen, I will give this about it. The pick formula is complicated. Every time we think we have it down, it seems like we're off a little bit. I kind of think the NFL tinkers with it maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to kind of follow. Marcus will give you the bottom lines, but I think the real thing here that's new and interesting these last few years is that you're able to trade these picks, which has really changed the angle on a lot of things for the Cowboys specifically.
Yeah, you used to not be able to trade these compensatory picks. Now, not only can you trade them, you can trade them in future years based on what you're expected to get. But it's a very complicated formula that the NFL does not like to share. Basically, what it is crossing players off, right? Like the Cowboys had several free agents leave last year. And because they didn't sign anybody over a vet minimum contract, they didn't cross any of these guys out. So they lost Tyron Smith at $12 million a year, Dorrance Armstrong at $11 million a year, Tyler Biadasz at $9 million a year, Tony Pollard at $7 million, and Dante Fowler at $3 million. Other teams like the Giants, they lost Saquon Barkley at $13 million a year, but because they signed John Runyon, a guard, for a similar amount, they cancel out. So the Giants are getting no compensatory pick for Saquon Barkley. That sucks, John Mara, but oh well. As for the Cowboys, the most picks you can get are 4 compensatory picks. The highest pick that you can get is a 3rd round pick, which occurs at the bottom of every round. So all of these picks are going to be at the bottom of every round. The Cowboys are expected to get 4 picks this year, a 5th rounder for Tyron, a 5th rounder for Dorrance Armstrong, a 5th rounder for Tyler Biadasz, and a 6th rounder for Tony Pollard. And the Cowboys rely on these picks a lot because they are not super aggressive in free agency, but they use these picks to kind of help build the bottom of the roster, their depth. This is very important to how the Cowboys do business in the NFL.
Yeah, it's really, since they've instituted this it's really been a big part of their kind of team building situation, and I think you could also say it's maybe influenced them into some bad behavior.
It's hurt them, and sometimes because they've been too willing to just try to sit back and collect comp picks rather than keeping guys or going out and signing guys. I
think the issue is that they draft picks are valuable, but they're overvaluing these 5th and 6th round picks where, I think there were times when they were hitting on 5th and 6th round picks at a very high rate, an unusually high rate. And I think that they just started to think, well, they can do that, consistently every single year, and just not every draft class can support that. You're not going to hit on those guys every single time. And when you think about ultimately what you're trading is, you're allowing a good player to walk out the door. Yeah, you're saving the money aspect of it too by not signing them, but you're allowing a good player to walk out the door, and then it's like you're happy with the consolation prize that you get, right? It's it's almost like when you go to a birthday party, right? Like you bring a nice gift to the birthday party, and then you walk away with a lesser gift. It's like the party gift, right? It's like, so.
Last year, the Cowboys actually had 2 free agents that they lost, Dante Fowler and Jonathan Hankins, that they're not going to get any picks for because they just didn't sign any free agents. Or sorry, they already had lost so many other free agents that they don't even count into the formula. So they could have signed somebody for $3 million, $4 million last year, and it wouldn't have hurt their comp pick formula in any way.
Yeah, and I think that it almost feels like they've gotten too tricky here. Right, like that they felt like they found some sort of market inefficiency that they were exploiting, but they're not. Like or at least they aren't anymore. Maybe they were previously. Maybe they felt like they had found a way to replace middle of class veterans with middle class, lower tiered rookies that they hit on that can play just way better than anyone expected. Yep. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not a long-term strategy that's worked for the Cowboys. They've done well in some of those picks, but not to the point where they're replacing guys like Dante Fowler with a 4th round pick, or a 5th round pick. So I think it's something that they need to kind of maybe tinker with a little bit more.
And just to be clear, if the Cowboys were to re-sign someone like Osa Odigizua this offseason, that doesn't count towards your compensatory formula. So again, they can re-sign him. It's not going to be a big issue. It's only in the free agents that you lose and the free agents that you sign. There are some weird stipulations on players who have been in the league over 10 years. They get knocked in the comp formula. It used to be based on playing time. And some of these teams
really complicated.
Well, really complicated. And some of these teams would fudge the numbers a little bit, like the last couple
right.
games of the season they wouldn't play. So they could gain a whole round in the comp formula. But that is generally how it works.
Yeah, and it's complicated. That's again, I totally understand why the questioner asked the question, because I don't think anybody completely understands, except for maybe someone in the NFL office completely understands how it works. But it is a game that the Cowboys tend to play a lot. I'm starting to wonder if the worm hasn't turned a little bit on this as the Cowboys, especially this last year, it just felt like, man, you are getting pennies on the dollar on the talent that you are letting walk out the door versus what you're getting back. Even if you're only spending pennies on the dollar versus what you were spending.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to look at some of the top defensive tackles in the 2025 draft, talk about how they might fit Matt Eberflus's defense. So tune in for that. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.